Soledad O'Brien. Welcome to Matter of Fact. President Donald Trump says his administration will forge a society that's, quote, colorblind and merit-based. DEI experts say, creating a merit-based workplace is the goal of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
There is a direct correlation between diversity and business success.
I talked to the CEO of the Global Black Economic Forum about who actually benefits from DEI.
I'm Carmen Twillie Ambar, president of Oberlin College and Conservatory. Welcome to Running to the Noise, where I speak with all sorts of folks who are tackling our toughest problems and working to spark positive change around the world. Because here at Oberlin, we don't shy away from the challenging situations that threaten to divide us. We run towards them. At Oberlin, we believe one person can change the world. And this month, I'm speaking with someone who makes it her mission, Soledad O'Brien, an award-winning journalist, author, documentarian, philanthropist, and, I'm happy to say, Oberlin parent. O'Brien has built her career amplifying marginalized voices and tackling urgent societal issues like race and gender and class. With a legacy spanning CNN, PBS, CBS, and NBC, O'Brien has reported on critical topics such as environmental racism, the end of affirmative action, and veteran PTSD treatments. Over a decade ago, she founded Soledad O'Brien Productions, earning Emmy Awards for projects like The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks, Hungry to Learn about college students too mired in debt to afford food, and Black and Missing, a documentary shedding light on neglected missing persons cases. But O'Brien doesn't just spotlight inequities. Through her powerful foundation, she's helping girls and young women from underserved communities graduate from top colleges like Stanford and Yale and Princeton. What I admire most about O'Brien is her unwavering commitment to both telling the stories that matter and actively making a difference. The audience may or may not know that Soledad has a son here at Oberlin. How's Charlie doing? How is he faring?
He's doing well.
Good.
They just canceled the lacrosse game this weekend because I guess it's supposed to be 1 degree.
Yes. It's Ohio, you know.
So I feel like he's a little bit happy that he doesn't have to run around outside in the freezing cold. But he's doing great. He's doing great. You know, one thing I didn't calculate was that he's a twin and he misses his twin terribly. So they talk every day. They've been back to see each other. His twins at Wesleyan. So they go back and forth.
You may know that I have triplets. Mm-hmm. And the triplets are seniors in high school.
Wow.
And so we are in this process right now. And I have one OB who applied early decision. So Gabby is going to come to Oberlin. But we don't know about the boys because they decided not early decision. And so we'll see in the next couple of weeks.
You know, my boys, I would say they're close, but I would say they've always had like separate friends. They're not identical.
Right.
And so people would say that to me all the time. How are they going to manage? I'm like, they're going to manage just fine. They're not that dependent on each other. Boy, was I wrong.
Yeah, no, I feel like, you know, at first it was kind of like, yeah, we'll be fine, and as Gabby selected, then the boys started to say, well, maybe we should go together because, you know, and I can feel that little twist of, oh my gosh, we're not going to be in the same room together, you know, and wondering how they're going to manage without each other.
It's a thing. I'll tell you, I would not have guessed it, but it is definitely a thing.
Well, I'm so excited to have Soledad O'Brien here on the podcast, Running to the Noise. You know, as you look at your career, you spent your life as a journalist really amplifying marginalized voices in a lot of ways and pressing societal issues around race and class and gender and identity. And I guess I was wondering whether you had a specific moment in your life that you feel like sparked this particular part of the passionate work you do.
It's funny because you describe it that way, but of course, it's that way looking in the rearview mirror, right?
Yeah.
Partly because it's so hard to get stories of marginalized people on TV. It would be
we'll talk about that.
I would not set out to do that because it'd be like, I'd like a path that's full of boulders and obstacles, really hard, but just give me the marginalized people so that I have to literally sell my soul in order to get these stories on. I mean, you just wouldn't do that. But I do think I was successful when CNN used to cover a lot more live news. And so for a while when I was there, really in 2005, it just was a year that was just so full of breaking news stories, right? We had the tsunami, we had Hurricane Katrina, we had the Pope died. It was just back to back to back to back. I was traveling all the time, just living on the road.
Right.
And one of the themes that was consistent was exactly that. The people, no surprise, right, who are affected by climate change, who are affected by catastrophe, who are affected by sudden shifts in policy, of course, were people who are marginalized. And so I ended up de facto covering marginalized people, although I was really out there just trying to do live reporting for CNN. I was an anchor of their morning show. And so it probably started with the tsunami and then moved domestically by the fall of that year into Hurricane Katrina and everything that was in between that year. So I think that's what sort of created this strategy, and probably more from my bosses than for me personally, of like, oh, she can go cover these communities, and we can think about these communities and covering them from a policy perspective versus just we went in to talk to these people.
Right.
Let's actually analyze how what we call on the show that I do now, which is called Matter of Fact, how policy lands on people.
Right. Well, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your kind of family background, because I'm imagining that was impacting as well. I know you were born to Afro-Cuban mother and an Irish-Australian father, and you're growing up on Long Island. I don't know how diverse Long Island was at the time, but what I know about Strong Island, it's not particularly diverse. I'm wondering.
My high school was 93% white when I was there, and now it's down to 90% white that I'm not there. So, yeah, I do think the way I grew up definitely influenced a bunch of things. I have 5 brothers and sisters. We're all very close. And my parents were both immigrants. My dad came to this country from Australia. My mom came to this country from Cuba. They got married at a time when interracial marriage was illegal in this country. And so my parents, when they were looking for a house to buy in the 1960s, no one would sell them a house, right? No one was going to sell a house to a Black woman and her husband. So my dad basically had to ditch my mom in order to go meet with people, and he was eventually able to buy property, and they built their house when I was born. So it was just finished right when I was born in 1966.
Yeah, that's a common story for lots of interracial families, and leave the person of color at home and go and get what you...
Spouse? What spouse? What?
Yeah, that's right.
My parents were pragmatists, right? Like
yes,
a lot
of course.
You just do what you got to do.
Do what you got to do.
To get it done. But I do think there was a real value in being a bit of an outsider, right? Like you're both in and you're outside. My Spanish is more like Spanglish. Yeah. But I certainly can understand what people are saying. And so it was always very helpful to know what was happening around you if someone was speaking in Spanish. I would sit in newsroom meetings and think they're talking about them, but really it's us, right?
That's
it's us. And sometimes when we would do documentaries, I would have to actually say that out loud. Like, you guys keep saying them. Well, how about them? Who are these people who come to America? And I'm like, it's actually us. These are my people.
Right.
And it was very hard to get people to, in their heads, make that turn, right?
So it reminds me, I used to do, presidents are always out doing speeches.
Presidenting.
Yeah, presidenting. And I used to do this speech about outsiders' integrity. The point was, particularly for folks of color or for different identities, that there's something that you bring to the table as an outsider that maybe people who are inside the system in whatever way don't bring. Sometimes I think students in particular will want to try to not be different, not conform in ways that makes them like everybody else. And I've always said to them, no, that outsider's integrity is why you're there.
Yeah.
It's what you bring that's special and that's unique. And it sounds to me like in lots of situations, over time, you were able to bring that sort of outsider's integrity because you were there to bring something different.
Yeah, I think that's really true, right? In some ways, people who are outsiders often feel like they're less than.
Right.
They're less than because they're not on the inside. And boy, if you were on the inside, you'd have all this access. You'd have all this power. When actually there is this superpower in being on the outside. You see things sometimes that other people are almost too close to it to see. And so I completely agree with that. I felt like I always had this, I'm not sure it was called integrity, but I felt like it was just this POV of having a foot inside and a foot outside, so that when people would say things, and a lot of my friends would say the same thing, like, that's not really true of the community. And so you really would hear from people very clearly about the myths that they're living with and the myths that they tell themselves. And I was often in a position to say, like, that's just not a thing. That's not true. And when you're doing documentaries, often those myths, turn into actual stories in the documentary.
Right.
And it's actually a lot of work to run around and say, that's not true, that's not true. I actually had to shut down when we did Latino in America. This is what gives you a bad reputation of being a pain. But so I remember we were doing our first meeting.
And just so the audience knows, you've done Black in America, you've done Latino in America.
We did gay in America, Muslim in America.
Right.
So we were doing I did not name them. I'd just like to say on the record, because I feel like I would be a little teeny bit more creative. But
but it created a theme, and we all remember them.
Right?
Yes.
So I remember when we were doing Latino in America, the guy who was the producer basically kind of told me, this is what we're doing.
Yeah.
And one of the segments was going to be about me. So, and I'm like, and listen, I'm a TV anchor. Nobody loves me more than me. I love me some me, let me tell you.
I love it. I love it.
This was going to be the first documentary that CNN was ever doing on Latinos.
Yeah.
It just felt not okay.
Yeah.
And I remember leaving that meeting. And that was a meeting where everybody would say, they do this, they do that. And I walked up, CNN had at their old location, had a spiral staircase that took you up to the president's office. And I said to him, we got to kill this. This is not going to work. And I'm not going to be part of what's going to be a giant embarrassment. And then we ended up bringing a new team together out of that because he killed it.
Yeah.
And one of the producers, she said, I think the theme should be Garcia is the 8th most popular name in America. And to look at a bunch of different Garcias and to kind of tell the American story, the Latino American story through that device. That is genius, right?
Yeah.
I'd love to do a segment all about me, but that's an embarrassment when you're doing your first documentary ever on Latino. It shouldn't be a vanity play. It should be a real look at real journalism. CNN at the time had very low numbers of Latinos. I think we were at like 7%, so very low.
So it wasn't an audience that was gravitating to CNN at the time.
No, and they could have been, if you build it, they'll come.
You have to build that audience. That's right. Well, I want to return to something you said about the challenge of getting these stories on the air. And in retrospect, yes, you can look at your career through that lens, but you might not have picked it if you'd known how many boulders would be in the way and how many times you'd have to move things around. I wanted to talk a little bit about a particular story that you've talked about in the past around doing Black in America and talking about the experience that lots of Black families have in talking to their children about interactions with the police. And those of us who have Black children, this is a pretty common thing. We talk to our kids about how to interact with police. And there was someone sort of in the higher ups, I guess it is, that had a different perspective about it. And so I'm hoping you can tell that story for the audience. And from the lens of what it means to try to get these difficult stories on it and have people in the room questioning you.
Yeah, he was my boss and he was a great guy, right? I mean, he literally funded Black in America for 9 years and that stuff was very expensive. But I remember the very first Black in America, it was a very big deal, 6-hour doc series over 3 nights on CNN. And we got great reviews and people to this day come to me and say, I remember where I was when I saw it.
It's one of those signature pieces. People understand that it said something about what was happening in the country.
And so we were doing something called the TCA, which is a Television Critics Association, which means you sit on the stage and they ask you about this project. And at some point, someone said, so what was your big takeaway? And I said, one of the things I took away was just how we looked at Black families who were living in poverty, a woman who was literally being evicted while I was interviewing her, Black families that were middle-class Black families. They were getting ready to take their kids off to college.
Right.
Black families that were living in the Hollywood Hills and were wealthy. And I said, the thing that I found so fascinating was when they would talk about policing, it was like they were speaking off a script. You could be being evicted to being a zillionaire.
Right.
And they would say the same thing. When my son, occasionally daughter, but almost always son, his son turned 13. I sat him down and I told him, if you are interacting with the police, here's what you got to do, blah, blah, blah. So that was my answer to this journalist's question. So I answered the question and we left the stage. And as I was leaving, my the guy who was my boss. He was actually my boss's boss. He was the head of CNN worldwide and a very good dude, like a nice man. And he said, that's just not true. And I was like, I just spent 18 months on this talk. What? He said, white people have the same conversations with their kids. And I said, I think, having grown up in a 93% white neighborhood, said, I think the conversations in white communities are much more about be respectful to the police.
Right.
I think the conversations in Black communities, all these people were telling me, I tried to give my child advice so he would live.
That's right.
Through an interaction.
That's right.
Like, it's very different.
Absolutely.
And he said, it's just not true. Don't tell that story again. And because I liked my job and I wanted to keep it, I'm like, okay.
Yeah. It's an incredible story to me because I think it's interesting for someone, I assume this person was not Black, to try to speak to those stories as if they would be the same, because you'd have to know some things about the Black experience to appreciate why you might think they're different or not. But I just think from an evidentiary perspective about what happens when Black people interact with the police, particularly Black men, there's something very different about those experiences. We can just look at the data around that. So the notion that the conversation is not different, I was flabbergasted when I read that. And I thought, this is the challenge as you describe it. I would assume it's not just getting the news department or the opinions folks to pay attention to these stories, but it's in the creation of them and how they're designed and what they say. That's also the challenge.
Yeah, I was flabbergasted too. Each of these families, they weren't saying, I try to teach my kids to be respectful. They were saying, I want him to live.
Yeah.
And at 13, I realized they were getting old enough to have a serious conversation about how to survive.
Yeah.
And again, I always tell people, this guy is what you would consider to be a good guy. It's not like, here's a guy who's racist. He funded Black in America. He was there probably for several years that I was there, and then we kept funding it after that. But it made me really recognize the depth of the challenge. Everybody comes to this with their point of view around it. And by the way, point of view that he had no business having.
That's right.
That's really what you're battling when you're telling stories about people who are in the margins in some capacity.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has the thing of like, well, I used to take the train with homeless people, so I know. Or I used to take the train with people who are recovering from addiction, so I know. I used to take the train with Asian women, so I know. And everybody is blessed with the courage of their wrong opinion about stuff they do not know. And nobody has any kind of embarrassment around, like, maybe this is not your place to know. And so that was the challenging part. And our docs all dealt with a lot of data and a lot of studies. I mean, we weren't just like, hey, these are the things I'm feeling strongly about, and so I want to talk about them. And it didn't matter. Like, he was the president of the news division, and he just felt like that's not a story we should tell. And so I didn't, because I think we're in this moment now, right? If you want to keep your job, keep your mouth shut.
Yeah. I think it also speaks to this moment around why you might care about inclusion and diversity and why you might think that adds value because of the different perspectives that can help us be better as a society. That's what is so powerful about that story.
When we started having in both the West Coast and the East Coast stories about little old Asian ladies getting clocked and beaten up in the street.
Right.
The number of newsrooms that discovered that they had no people in a metropolitan area where there were lots of Asians, right, who could go out and have a conversation with a person who was an immigrant who had been attacked. They couldn't talk to them in their own language. That's a massive miss.
Yeah.
That is a massive problem. And you saw newsrooms suddenly, and it's happened in every newsroom I've ever been in, where someone's like, oh, you speak this? We're elevating you to producer tonight. Right. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
But I mean, that was a really good example of like, yeah, if you want to speak to this woman about the horrific experience that she has had, you had better find a native speaker. There's no question that we're often playing catch up because you really need these voices around the table to do the best kind of coverage.
It's not just about what happens in the newsroom. I would offer that this value plays out in the boardrooms of America, in your local nonprofit, wherever you are in this space, this idea that diversity and inclusion is some drain on our ability to do good work. My experience is that the exact opposite is true.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the classic story that people tell, right, is when Chevy decided to go with the Chevy Nova and then tried to sell it in Spanish language countries where Nova means doesn't go, right? And that's a classic, like, yeah, if you had some people around. But listen, how many times have you seen an ad and you're like, wow, you literally have no Black people in this room because they would have stopped you from this mess. And it happens a lot, right? Where you're like, how did this picture, how did this story get approved? Yeah. I can tell there was no one in the room who felt empowered to say, so let me save everybody from a massive PR mess that is coming down the pike.
Right. And I think that it's been great to see some of these organizations to understand that even in the context of the financial bottom line, I've said to people sometimes, I don't need you to believe it sometimes, even just a mercenary perspective. That's what Costco is saying, did so well to say, hey, this is important, shareholders. We're worse off if we don't think about diversity and equity and inclusion. And so the reason to do this, if for nothing else, is so
make money.
The bottom line can be better.
Yeah. Our job is to make money for shareholders. And that means we need to speak to the people who come shopping in our aisle. And there's a bunch of people who on Black History Month want to buy some stuff. And there's a bunch of gay people who during Pride Parade, they want to buy some stuff. And I think this idea that we're not going to think of or allow even now people to talk about the value of diversity is so crazy.
It's a huge miss, America.
It really is. It really is. It really is. Miss.
We've talked about, in retrospect, looking at these marginalized communities, and maybe that wouldn't have been your choice at the beginning, but now that you look back at this body of work, it's certainly signature and powerful. I know you've done Black and Missing, Hungry to Learn, where you worked with college students who are navigating food insecurity, Rosa Parks. You've done these documentaries, and I'm wondering if, in retrospect now, you have some elements that you look for that when you see all those elements together, you say, oh yeah, okay, this is it.
Yeah, we have a new doc. We had a project. I'm an EP on it at Sundance. And our documentary won Best Director. Geeta Gandabir was the director. And we're in the process of selling this doc. And it's very interesting because I think the lesson learned is you have to understand what the market wants while also sticking to the things that you think are important. So I've always found the social issue interesting to explore. On the show we do, matter of fact, that's what we do. We look at how policy lands on people. Right. And this particular doc, which is called A Perfect Neighbor, is about a stand your ground case in Ocala, Florida. The woman who was killed, the Black woman who was shot through her neighbor's door. The neighbor, she was knocking on the door and the neighbor shot her through the door. Our director knew the family very well. They were almost like family to her. And so she went to start trying to figure out how do we tell this story. Right. But I promise you that if we had gone to a big streamer or anybody and said, hey, so we want to do a really important documentary about stand your ground in the state of Florida, they would have been like, yeah, that's so, I mean, we love diversity,
that's
but.
Right. And we all know about Trayvon, so.
Right. So I feel like it's been done, but thank you. Right. We ended up, and really this was Geeta's idea, and we had a fantastic editor. 90% of the doc is done with body cam because the police had visited the dispute between really the white woman at the center of it and the whole entire neighborhood. She was constantly fighting and feuding and whatever. And so it's told through body cam, which means it's actually like true crime.
Yeah, like real live, you are in the moment as you're watching the body cam.
Everybody loves true crime right now, and I think that's something that everybody's investing in. And listen, I like true crime also, and I'm in the middle of watching White Lotus on HBO, right? Which starts with a crime and everything. They're going to backtrack us through. So like, I get it. I totally get it. But you have to figure out, how do we take a project that has a meaning and that's important and then make sure that it's wrapped in a package that a streamer's going to be able to sell? You can't just say, I have a plate of broccoli here and I don't really care that you don't like broccoli. I'm going to sell it to you. You have to say, listen, this is really interesting and good and you're going to want this. And yes, we have pureed the broccoli into the pasta sauce. And so that's what I spend a lot of my time doing, is really, you have to figure out what is the thing that people are buying. I run a production company, right? I sell content. What are people buying? And then what can you do to make it really thoughtful and smart and great? It doesn't just have to be garbage.
Yeah. I'm wondering, lots of folks recognize you for your time at kind of the cable news and the network news and all the ways that we know Soledad O'Brien. And I'm wondering whether this independence, this own production company that's moving out of maybe mainstream media, I don't know if that's the right way to say it, was it about the independence to do your own stories and to have control over how you talk about the work that you're engaged in?
Not really, because you're still selling it to somebody.
Yeah.
So if independence is now I've got to take 10,000 meetings and try to convince buyers to buy something, sure. But the reality is when I was at CNN, you had a built-in platform. You only had to convince your boss or the news director in some capacity. So no, I think it was just more that I got to spend my time doing the things that I was interested in and that I knew could get an audience. And then also, I think I really got to just work with people I liked. I mean, one of my very first experiences was doing, as a CEO, was working with a person who was just terrible. He was so mean to me and rude to me, and we had hired him. And at one point he said to me, "I don't even know why you're on this project." And I told my girlfriend, I was so upset, and I was new, right?
You hired him, and he was asking you, why are you on this project?
And I didn't even have a good answer, right? Because you know how when someone says that and you're new, you're kind of like, why am I on this project?
You're shocked. You didn't realize what authority you had.
And so my girlfriend's like, you are on this project because CNN has paid you to do this project. And you have hired him because our production company was a production company kind of name only. We hadn't hired teams of people. And, I learned a lot on that gig. But I just remember being so dumbfounded. And at the end of that process, I had learned so much. And we ended up doing a great doc. But I was like, never again.
Never again.
So that's, to me, is the freedom of running your own thing, right? You can just choose to work with great people who are really interesting, who are going to help you solve problems. But you're still ultimately selling it and trying to figure out what's the best way to tell this story and how do I convince someone in kind of a crazy marketplace right now to buy it.
We have a new major in business. We have entrepreneurship as this piece. And one of the things we've been talking about a lot here at Oberlin, particularly because we have this conservatory where lots of those students almost have to think about themselves as their own company anyway. They are going to be in a gig economy and that sort of thing. I'm wondering what the kind of nerves were to launch out on your own, not without the safety net of the news network. What was that? Were you fearful?
Yeah.
Were you confident? Where were you?
A little bit of both. I was a little worried because once you lose your platform, right? If you can't get people on TV, if you can't do stories, it's really hard. But on the other hand, I knew that there were certain things that I knew how to do. I'd been at it for quite a long time. And I knew I had a big enough name.
Following,
brand name that, so it was a combination. I felt so awkward calling myself a CEO. I'd almost mumble it like, I'm this, because it just felt so ridiculous, right? I mean, I'm the CEO, but I'm also emptying the garbage cans and I'm trying to figure out, are we going to be able to make payroll?
That's right. That's right.
I was very fortunate because I had spent a lot of time working in broadcast and in cable news and had been paid at a pretty high level. So I had a good savings that I could immediately get a space in New York City, right?
Take a risk and do some things,
So that was a really big thing. The thing I regret the most is that I honestly did not know how to do a budget. I was a TV anchor. I'd never run a P&L. I'd never done a real budget. I'd never been responsible for that. And so I always advise people, all your entrepreneurs, take accounting, because I promise you, when it's your actual money, you're selling it actually hurts a lot to make a mistake on that front. I did a budget once and oh my gosh, people told me, they're like, oh, I'm super good at budgets. I'll do the budget. And like an idiot, I'm like, okay, because I don't know how to do budgets. Right. And then that budget was the worst, terrible, awfulest budget I've ever been part of. And I made 98 cents a day shooting 12 hours a day. When you realize actually, I do know about budgets. I do know about how much hair and makeup costs. I do know about travel. And so I think anybody who's really thinking about being an entrepreneur in some capacity, really understanding money. Because when it's your own money, I promise you, making that kind of mistake is not fun.
Well, the other thing I love about it is that sometimes at small liberal arts colleges, people can say, well, why do you have business? And is that really us? And they don't realize the ability to make change in the world that can happen in all of these different ways. And so here you are, entrepreneur, CEO of your own production company, making the types of stories that make a difference.
Yeah.
I mean,
and it's a business, right?
And
It's literally all we do is, and again, people are always like, you're on your own. So must be so great. I'm like, no, all I do is do meetings. I literally get on the phone. I beg Netflix to talk to me so that I can pitch my next project. And hopefully we framed it in a way that they think is interesting. So yeah, I think having students really understand what business means is crucial.
I love it. Well, I didn't want to miss the opportunity to talk a little bit about your foundation. And I'm wondering the impetus for Powerful, why that project, why put your message and energy behind that foundation?
It really goes back to my parents, who were both educators, and my husband's parents, who were both educators. His dad was a professor. His mom was the head of a lower school in Providence, Rhode Island.
Okay.
And my mom was a high school Spanish and French teacher. My dad was a founding professor, actually, at SUNY Stony Brook.
Oh, wow.
I did their commencement not too long ago.
Oh, did you? Oh, that must have been going back to the roots.
Yeah, the first commencement had 30 people, and then the one we did had 6,000 some odd people. I think immigrants my parents certainly had this just absolute obsession / love of education. Certainly for my mother, who was coming out of Cuba, I mean, hers was wrapped in a lot of paranoia, right? It's something no one can take away from you.
Right.
You get to the border, and no matter what happens, you
will have that forever. That is your ticket, so to speak.
Exactly. And I think that they just really valued education. Like the thing that can move the needle is education. And so we decided that we would help, right after Hurricane Katrina, young women specifically. We decided to help get to and through college. I was seeing a lot of to and sometimes not through.
Yeah.
And then that just meant that you had taken on a lot of loans, and it was expensive, and it was messier than when you started. And
you
so
didn't have that credential afterwards to make the shift into the next phase.
So that was really how we started. We believed what our parents believed. Like, wow, the only way to help this person move out of poverty, they got to get an education. They've got to be able to access something else than what was available to their parents and their parents.
Yeah.
And it really was true. I grew up in Long Island, and I was like, oh my God, this is like the most boring place in the entire world. I can't wait to get out of here. But a lot of boring is very stable.
That's a powerful statement, that a lot of boring is stable, that you weren't in a situation where your life was being upended and you didn't know what was going on.
I never thought like, oh my God, are we going to eat tonight? Where are we going to sleep? My mom's not going to be able to make the rent.
Yes.
I never thought, well, I guess I could start college this year, but maybe next year I won't be able to go. And so one of the first things we did with our scholars was to say to them, like, you are now a scholar. You will get through, or we will all die trying. So we used to tell them, because some people, you have to really get them through, as you know. And so you just see the relief. It's not hanging over your head, and you don't have to figure it out, and you don't have to take off this semester to work and then come back next semester, but then take off the following semester, but then come back.
That's right.
We're just going to send you to college to do a lot, right? It's not just I went and that's what happened. It's like, great, now you have to take advantage of every single thing the university offers, and take advantage of every networking opportunity, and take advantage of meeting with 1 million people who are all graduates of your university. And you don't just sit around and say, oh, this is going to land on me and become valuable at some point. I mean, our girls are all in poverty, absolutely all in poverty. And to be able to say, we're just going to help you get to and through. Like my parents said to me, you're going to go. We're sending you to college. What an amazing advantage. And to have that stability for both myself and for my husband, Brad, you really recognize the privilege that comes from just stability.
I don't know why that word struck me so much, but I guess we're watching a feeling of instability, I think, for lots of people right now. And that feeling of, I'm going to make it through, and I'm going to have a stable way to do it. And I'm imagining you watching some of these students go through this journey is so rewarding.
Yeah, it's been amazing. The funny thing is that I sort of thought like they'd go to college, like my own children. They go to college and then they leave. And that's the never shall you, like they're done.
Come to these doors again. It's all done. You're complete.
Oh my gosh. Everybody's back in their bedroom at some point. All those students have come back into my life, which is so much fun. That you don't actually lose them. I mean, we had one of our scholars just made a big donation to us, which was amazing.
Oh, incredible.
Most wonderful young woman. And to be able to give her the social capital, the little bit that I had, right? She said, I want to be in technology. I'm like, well, I know some people. Let me call them. She would go on to IBM, go on to be wildly successful. It's just amazing.
That makes me feel great. I wanted to ask you just a couple of more things. And some of this is about what's happening in the world today. So you can take your choice about how far you want to go. But I do know that in your memoir, The Next Big Story, you sort of describe yourself as a glass half full person.
Still trying.
The one who you insist that there must be a way to fix things. And so I'm hoping that you can help our audience, and maybe me too, see what's half full about what's happening in this country as we are having an upending, I think, of how people are thinking about all sorts of things: immigration, diversity, equity, inclusion, transgender rights, all of these things that people are asking themselves, where are we going to end up? Maybe even some concern about the power of the presidency and how this president may choose to operate with respect to judicial orders. So half full?
Yeah, I'm unfortunately nauseatingly half full person all the time. I can't help myself. We're in a really terrible time, and I'm not sure. I mean, sometimes people will say to me, like, what should Democrats be doing? What should people? And I'm like, I don't know that there's anything I can do at this moment. I think that a lot of the learning, and we're seeing some of it, has to come from people who voted for a thing who would then later say, I didn't realize that I was going to be cutting the teachers at my kids' school.
Right.
I didn't realize that I was going to lose my job. There's a lot that's been said on the record, right? I don't think it's, oh my gosh, what a total surprise. I am always optimistic because I do believe people actually start to figure things out. And I think Americans often operate obviously under their own self-interest, but I think we're seeing a lot of people who've realized where their self-interest lies. And listen, to some degree, we have never been able to figure out immigration in this country. It has to happen, right? Like, it's been for a bunch of administrations. It's been a fail.
Yeah, like you think about race in this country, immigration is like these age-old things we just keep stumbling over. I guess one of these days we'll figure out that if we fix those things, we might have to not have to stumble over these anymore.
Exactly. And so to some degry, and I'm here today in this great state of Florida, which has its own many challenges.
You got a few.
We got a lot. But I think people are really discovering a little bit about the power of the presidential executive order. I think people who didn't know any of that, I think a lot of people who voted for a thing are discovering that's not exactly what they thought they were going to get. And I'm always kind of like, I don't know, I voted for the lady. I don't know what to tell you.
I don't know what to say.
I'm not sure there's anything I can do. What I've tried to do in my work is to stay in my lane and keep telling stories. We finished a doc about the end of DEI. We just did a doc about the death of affirmative action. So people understand the implications. And I'm not naive enough to think that, people watch it and then suddenly we've changed everybody's mind. But I do think it's important to go on the record for people to understand.
What is media getting wrong in this moment, getting right in this moment?
I think getting wrong is a very long list. But even when I was working in cable, this idea of setting everybody up as this versus this, I always laugh and say, in your organization, if you wanted to figure out an issue, you would never take your two craziest employees, right, who don't see eye to eye on anything, and be like, we're just going to have them battle out. I'm going to have Crazy Bob and Crazy Sue just fight it out. Like, know what you would say, you know who should be leading this? I've got a really good person who's smart, who's thoughtful,
open,
and who brings people together and says, I see what you're saying. That's an interesting point. And I see what you're saying. I think, okay, so we got to come together, right? In business, who any intelligent person would lean on, that person who brings people together and who is trying to find a path forward. And of course, cable news is the opposite of that. We are literally Crazy Bob and Crazy Sue fighting it out.
Right. Are you saying like fueling the partisanship in some way?
Yeah, of course, because you have to create drama. Many years ago, I was on Chris Matthews' show right when I left CNN. And I was doing an interview about the death of Fidel Castro. I'd done a lot of reporting in Cuba, probably more than a lot of TV news reporters. And he had me on a show to talk about that. And about 2 minutes before I went live, they said, we're going to put you up against Jose Diaz-Balart. I'm like, up against?
Yeah.
And so Jose Diaz-Balart comes out very strong, talking about how Castro is a dictator and Castro's bad. And I'm like, oh, because cable news does this versus this, if he's in the dictator bad spot,
my job.
What?
Yeah.
Like, And again, my mother left Cuba, right? So not only would it be a position I don't agree with, that dictators are good, and so I would also be murdered when I got home, because my mother would just be like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
I said there's an interesting element of there's 400,000 people who are mulling around outside mourning Fidel Castro, who, and many of them will tell you how he destroyed the country. Would you like me to explain why that is? Because if you want to learn something, I'm happy to be helpful. Yeah. And so it gets complicated. All these things are complex and complicated. Yes. And I think cable news likes to break it down to it's this versus this. Either you believe this or you believe that. When actually in real life, it's always like, there's some truth over there, but there's some truth. And some of the stuff is contradictory. And I think often, certainly cable news, but even a lot of news doesn't give credit for this idea like stuff is complicated.
There's nuances here. It's not that simple.
But by the way, let me promise you, if you ever, Carmen, went on TV and said, well, that's a great question, it's nuanced, let me promise you, you'll never be invited back. Everyone would be like, oh no, you need to say, they need to be in jail, or oh no, they need to be promoted. Like you either this or this. And nobody likes the answer, which is actually the answer. It's complicated. Let me give you some context about what we're seeing. Here's why people are celebrating a guy who basically gave the middle finger to America. As a small island nation, they thought that was great. Also, everybody in Cuba would like to be in America and at least be able to come back and forth. And most of them have relatives in America, right? It's messy. It's complicated.
And you also seem to be saying on some level that not only are we doing the audience a disservice, but we are not giving them the right tools because we are making it be simplistic.
Yes.
It's either this or that.
And everybody knows it's not, right? And I kept saying, well, would you like me to explain this? I'm not up against anybody. By the way, dictator's bad, Castro bad, Batista bad.
That's right.
Mom, just so you know, Mom.
But listen, Mom, I got the lesson,
I got
Mom.
it. But like, wouldn't you want to understand this contradiction in mourning someone who you also, at the exact same moment, feel like he has ruined your opportunity? I think that's interesting. And so that's what I have found frustrating about cable news, that you have to manufacture this conflict because that kind of conflict sells. And so that's often what you see.
So last question for me. So you know this podcast is called Running to the Noise in respect for Michelle Obama's admonishment to Oberlin graduates when she was here as a graduation speaker, and saying that Obies run to the noise. Obies is what we call our students here at Oberlin. So Soledad O'Brien, how do you run to the noise? What does that look like for you?
I guess for me, I think there are just so many important stories that need to be told. And honestly, it would be so much easier if I were running around trying to figure out the next cupcake show. Like, what kind of cupcake show should I do?
That's right.
Can I tell you how those things print money? Oh, my God.
Yes. Can we be on the new British baking show?
Oh, my gosh.
Or is it cake? Or whatever it is?
So much better to do that. But the truth is, at the end of the day, I think for me, I've really come to terms with the fact that I think my career and what I bring to the world, and when I'm 6 feet under, people will say, oh yeah, she tried to take difficult stories and help people understand them. She tried to bring the conversation around stories of people who are marginalized and give some context and give some information. And that's not the easier path. It really isn't. I wish it were. I need a cupcake show. If you guys have a good cupcake show, I'd like to do a cupcake show and also do the other stuff. But
that's right. Well, maybe we can figure out a cupcake show on a college campus.
Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah. But because that would be really great. But unfortunately, I think the thing that interests me is the challenge part.
Yeah. Well, I can say on behalf of those who have watched your career and really watched your stories and learned from them that it is great work. We have been educated by this work and moved by it and grown because of it. That is as great a record as you could possibly have.
Thank you. I so appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to Running to the Noise, a podcast produced by Oberlin College and Conservatory. Our music is composed by Professor of Jazz Guitar Bobby Ferraza and performed by the Oberlin Sonny Rollins Jazz Ensemble, a student group created through the support of the legendary jazz musician. If you enjoyed the show, Be sure to hit that subscribe button, leave us a review, and share this episode online so Obies and other folks can find us too. I'm Carmen Twillie Ambar, and I'll be back soon with more great conversations from thought leaders on and off our campus.